Welcome back to the Afterword, a conversation about the future of words. We are so glad to have Dr. Ellen Hampshire and Marty Height here with us to continue our conversation about the background stories we tell regarding self-care and mindfulness. When we first started talking about what this episode would look like, I said, I associate self-care with prevention. If you take care of yourself, fewer bad things happen to you. But Amy disagreed. So it's your job to referee here. No. Right. Have you seen self-care used in restorative process through life issues such as trauma or sickness or grief? And maybe share with us a success story of somebody who's used self-care as restoration.
Technically, last episode we talked about reframing, right? So technically you can reframe this to make Holland right with everything, actually. Because if you talk about restoratively, then it's preventatively saying, hey, I'm going to prevent this from keep being a problem.
It's one way to reframe it. Okay, tell us a story here, Marty, that you can share, obviously, ethically.
Listen, I was more focused on my joke and not the story. Hold on. What was the question? Restorative self-care.
Yeah. How can
Absolutely.
self-care be restoratively as well as
Yes. Yeah. So to me, restorative self-care often comes at the end of intensity, right? Like there's a frequent statement that I hear that you're either going into a storm, you're either in a storm, or you're coming out of a storm, right? Life is a series of experiences, some good, some bad, right? Well, sometimes you can't get away from those, right? Maybe it's the death of someone you love. Maybe it's that, if you're a parent, as I experience, and it's soccer season, and then your kid's getting in trouble at school, and it's just something you can't escape. You just got to buckle down the hatches and you have to get through it. Right. And so you wear yourself thin in that process. It's a necessary thing, but it is what it is. It wears us out. Right. Well, when you come out the other side of that, what are you doing to bounce back? Recently, a mentor of mine was weary. And you know what he did? And not everyone has this luxury, but he rented a cabin in the mountains and he went up there for a self-reflective weekend. Right. That wouldn't rejuvenate me, but what we talked about earlier or last episode was you have to do what works for you. Being alone, spending time rejuvenated him. And so that's a tremendous amount of self-care. At the same time, it came at the back end of the trial. So in some ways, he's healing from what has just happened so that he's better prepared and refreshed for whatever's about to happen.
That makes a lot of sense. Ellen, did you have something to add to that?
Well, I was thinking about the question of in terms of a person who has used self-care to overcome, a significant event in their life, some trauma, or just to exemplify what Marty was saying. So this person lost their job after 20-something years with the same company. The person is a very loyal person, so that's important because it really hurt their ego as a man, and it was very difficult for him to put everything he had into his job for many years. Really felt proud of the work he had done, and then to lose his job. And as happens often, didn't use the best coping mechanisms at first, and then just added insult to injury and got a DUI. And, it happens to a lot of people. And that was a wake-up call. And so it was time to hit the pause, to actually take some time to figure out how can I take care of myself and really dig down deep and work through this. So he took time and didn't work for a little while and started engaging in some hobbies. finding things that just brought him joy. Just became silly without needing alcohol, connecting to family. But there's hobbies I feel were extremely helpful for him to really recover. And it's now been, I believe, 5 years since he's had anything to drink.
You can't undervalue the small things in life, right? We talked about baby steps. Mm-hmm. Not everybody can just swing for the fences and say, I'm going away for the weekend. I'm going to do this huge thing. Because what happens is when our life feels imbalanced, if you think of a pendulum that swings, if you were that pendulum and you had moved by 15 or 20 degrees, you feel like you're about to fall off a cliff. The truth is you're just a couple inches from center. Sometimes the smallest act of self-love can get us back to exactly where we need to be. Right. So for me, I try most days to engage myself mentally and emotionally, but not physically. So there's nothing better than a Friday night during the summer when I just cut grass. It's small, it's practical because it's serving the greater good of household chores, but it also helps to reset me. Right. Chopping a tree up, doing a household project. Sometimes it doesn't have to be luxurious or self-indulgent per se. Sometimes it's just something small that's outside of the norm that helps to kind of itch a scratch that normal life doesn't touch.
I love that.
I want to just add, add to that. I think we underestimate play. I mentioned silliness. Just being playful and silly, you release happy chemicals when you play. It also allows you to forget all of your to-do lists. You're in the moment, that it's coming back to that mindfulness, being present when you're playing. And it could be a sport. It could be, I had a group of 400 teachers keeping balloons up in the air. It's just some of those tiny moments can make all the difference.
Yeah, I love that. I think we all can relate to needing those little moments of restoration and the bounce back. I appreciate that. And that reframe. I know for me, my dog knows how to tell time at the end of the day. She knows it's time to play. And she, it basically says, we're done here staring at this square box thing. We need to go play. And I love that, even if it's for 5 minutes. And one of her favorite things to do is playing hide and seek with one of her toys. And, it's hilarious because it's silly to watch her actually find these things. But thank you so much.
My dog has been doing just that for since we sat down here to start recording this. He's been coming in and looking at me and getting a drink and pacing back out and then coming back and staring at me from the other room. And then I'm like, chill, it's fine.
We need to go play. Well, we'll put that into practice after we finish having this amazing conversation.
Right.
So let's play devil's advocate for just a moment. We've talked about the positives, the effects of self-care, mindfulness, but there are some indications that may need to be considered with this negative idea of disconnection, isolation, avoidance. So could you explain this and how do we find, I'm going to come right back to Marty's word, balance?
Yes. We can be unhealthy in any direction, right? When you talk about balance, I referenced a pendulum. I have a grandfather clock in my house that I got from my grandfather, ironic enough. So, when you pull that pendulum one direction and you let it go, it swings to almost to the same degree the other direction, but it's equal far from distant from the center, from where we need to be. And we see that a lot in society or even within ourselves. Like if I feel really stretched, I'm going to call out of work tomorrow, or I'm feeling overwhelmed, so I go to the other extreme, which can be equally unhealthy. And so when you talk about disconnection and being off-centered, to me, that you're the same degree away from mindfulness. You're just doing it in a different way. And so oftentimes people will say, well, this is my self-care day. No, you went from being over-involved to completely under-involved. You're still unhealthy. And so the key is figuring out, okay, what brings me back to center? And sometimes it's a series of mistakes, right? Like I'm overwhelmed. And so then I'm underwhelmed. And then I realize that wasn't the answer. And I have to kind of swing back and forth until I figure out, what does it mean to be engaged, but processing, engaged, but kind of digesting the experiences of life. And the better you get at that, the faster you are to realize and to do the hour-to-hour, minute-to-minute modifications so that you don't find yourself completely disproportionately off base before it's like, hey, I might be about to go off a cliff here. How do I get back to middle, right? So there is a level of self-awareness that comes with the word that we talked about, intentionality, so that you become more aware of where you're at, how you're feeling, and kind of correct along the way.
I love that idea of self-correction along the way. That's great. How about you, Ellen?
Well, I think that it's just like any other possibility for addiction. You can be addicted to this. And if you have a tendency to escape, then you need to be aware of that and that you might use this as your escape. And so I would just recommend that you not only increase your monitoring of, okay, where is my balance, like Marty was talking about, but have some people that you can check in with to say, what are you observing? Am I, do you feel I'm connected, et cetera? Can you kind of tap in and say, hey, we haven't seen you in a while, that type of thing. So just like I was talking about before, having that community that we work together to support, that's really helpful to make sure that you don't err on that side of using it as an escape.
Have you observed any trends or in self-care or mindfulness practices that maybe vary a little bit between cultures or between demographic groups? Is there any research around that? If so, what's it attributed to? What do you think? Does self-care differ according to demographics or cultural groups? Ellen, you wanted to start for us?
Yeah, sorry, I was unmuting. So I personally have not observed differences in the group of people I tend to work with. You've probably picked up on this, are educators. I teach yoga as well. But when I introduce any of this work, I don't see a resistance, that's specific to a culture. It's, we all have, I would say, if you use a certain terms, there might be some resistance. So for instance, when I first started using the term mindfulness a few years ago, my supervisor said, I'm a little worried about that term. Can we call it something else? And I just was like, okay, tell me more. And she was a little concerned about the Christian community and how they would perceive this. So that's the only conversation I've had where it's been a concern. But I haven't gotten pushback from teachers in the last couple of years at all.
I agree. The biggest pushback I've seen is exactly what you said in the language and what that means, right? So I'm heavily tied into the faith community, oftentimes working with people who identify as Christians, and you say mindfulness, and pretty soon they think they're like selling their soul or something. But then you define it and they're like, oh yeah, that sounds pretty good. And so part of it has been a kind of redefining it and putting it in words that they can palette. But I would also say that cultures have tendencies, and every culture has different tendencies. So just one example of that is the I to we ratio, right? And so as someone living in America, someone as the majority culture, I typically have experienced a strong I, right? Like, what do I want to do? Regardless of what my family expects, regardless of the culture, there's a large focus on there's downsides to that, right? Like sometimes I need pulled out of myself and connected to the culture. On the flip side, there's also cultures. For example, I spent about 10 days in Uganda, Africa, when I was in college, and that is a tremendous we culture. Everything focuses on the good of the society, of the family unit, right? Time is relative. Relationships are king, right? And so you can lose yourself in that. Right? Now, when you grow up in the culture, you're comfortable with that. It's perfectly fine. At the same time, there's still times that you need something, but the good of the culture takes precedence. Whereas in America, we tend to be a little more egocentric, focused on ourselves. And so then the reverse is true. And so those are just kind of two polarizing examples. But even within America, you see that. You see that North versus South, East Coast versus West Coast, right? You see that based on gender, race, sex. There's different norms for those populations, which can be really good, but then it can have downsides that sometimes create, hey, listen, you need to take care of yourself in this way. And so that's kind of an example of, I think, how I've seen it kind of play out and become imbalanced amongst cultures.
Perfect segue, but Ellen, tap back into it.
Sorry. I just had a thought while Marty was talking about, he's used some terminology about the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex. What I find is if anybody has any concerns about mindfulness or anything related to it, it's really important to take them through the steps of explaining the brain. It's something that we have taken on, to make sure that our population understands trauma, how it affects the brain, how you move into different brain states. And when you explain that, there is just this huge aha that they go, okay, I get it.
Yeah, that's excellent. And again, it's demystifying something. What was mystical about this terminology a few years ago has now, and that's why we wanted to talk about trends. We want to look at, what are the stories behind the trends? And you both have really articulated that well. But let's move into something that's a little bit more touchy. And Marty, you kind of dabbed your toe in the water a wee bit. Because our country and our world right now is very divisive. It's riddled with it. We have social instability. There's so much discouragement. What are ways that self-care and mindfulness can bring unity within communities? And Marty, I'm going to start with you first.
Man, that's good. You're right. We are constantly just force-fed the differences, right? How we are different people, which creates a level of chaos. Like, just think about masks. How much drama does walking into Food Line without a mask or with a mask cause, right? I remember a year ago about this time where to wear a mask got you funny looks. And to now, if you don't wear a mask, you get funny looks, right? I'm not here to state an opinion on it, but it's a very hot button topic. And so first and foremost, when we're not taking care of ourselves, we're not at a place to act rationally, or the most rational, I guess. And so, and hopefully this doesn't happen to you, but sometimes I just kind of want to pick a fight, right? Like if I'm not doing well, when I'm imbalanced, when there's something unresolved, right? Maybe me and my wife got into a fight before I came to work, right? My road rage all of a sudden goes up, right? My irritation, my frustration, I come to work, I'm a little more confrontational because I'm out of whack. That's not fair to the society around me. That's on me. And so I think one of the ways that self-care helps us, it puts us in a frame of mind that allows us to more accurately interpret what's going on instead of looking for an excuse to pick a fight, being more sensitive, being more irritable, and it's a fantastic opportunity to engage in self-care with someone else and develop a positive relationship instead of only knowing each other based on our differences. It's amazing. I kind of have this theory that it's completely made up. There's no research that 99% of disagreements are actually just misunderstandings. And if I take the time to get to know you and hear your reason for believing what you believe, I may still walk away disagreeing with you, but I'll probably almost always respect you, because at that point I'll understand why you're viewing life the way that you're viewing it. And I feel like that bonds us. Like, we don't need to agree, but just in getting to know each other first and then having conversations, I think is much more valuable. So, yeah.
I love that. It kind of goes back a little bit to your definition of affirmation that you shared in the beginning of our first episode. Thank you. That's great. What about you, Ellen?
So I really want to focus on the mindfulness part of it, as I defined it, with increasing that awareness with curiosity and kindness. So it's not only your awareness of self, but awareness of the world around you. If you're curious about it, you're going, that's interesting. I'm noticing my body's tensing up when this person is talking to me. I'm noticing that their voice is becoming elevated. It's just slowing yourself down to really pay attention. And it helps you to start noticing, oh gosh, I was triggered by that. Why was that? So one of my techniques in terms of mindfulness is I start noticing there are certain people that I get defensive around, people who are I don't want to say hypercritical, but they tend toward the red ink, through your work or whatever, and don't provide that affirmation. So those types of people, I take a deep breath. I turn my body to them. Actually, that's what I do first. I physically turn my body to them, and that engages a series of steps, just a few, it says, okay, now I need to take a deep breath. That slows me down to get into that prefrontal cortex, the best part of our brain that we can engage with one another. And then I just wish them well in my mind. And by doing that, I'm allowed to hear what they're saying and try and put myself in their shoes, rather than assuming that they're attacking me, rather than assuming or like allowing my triggers of, oh, I have to be perfect. And so when they're telling me what I did wrong, that I can slow down and go, no, I'm not perfect and it's okay. Things like that. So when you're engaging in self-care, and I might just repeat some of the things that Marty said, but you find yourself more patient, right? You find yourself less sensitive to, things that when you're not taking care of yourself, that doubt creeps in, that insecurity creeps in, versus those days where, those days where you're like, I've got it going on, and when you're really taking care of yourself and doing all the steps to be healthy, you have more and more of those days. And so when somebody says, hey, when you did that presentation, I think it might have been better to do this, you go, oh gosh, thank you so much for contributing to it. I think we can work together now and produce something even better, because we can't be everything to everybody.
Oh, these are so good. We need to blast these across billboards across our country, and beam them around the world, because I think that's right, exactly what we're doing.
It's exactly what we're doing. We have a final question we ask everybody who comes on to talk to us, and it's this: what's the metaphor to help us understand self-care and mindfulness? If you could give us just a word picture, what would self-care and mindfulness look like?
So my self-care metaphor is that you can't pour from an empty cup. Just real simple.
I had two metaphors. One involved a cup, so I am not going to use that one. Actually, I'll tell it quickly and then tell you the other one. One is you want to pour yourself out from the overflow of who you are, not from the remnants of who you are. So that's the idea. The other one, though, that All right. So this one, I've heard this one used a lot. And so you guys may have heard it, but it was one of the most powerful ones when I was learning self-care. And that is, if you've ever flown on an airplane, the flight attendants get up there and they say, hey, in the event that the oxygen masks are released, put it on yourself before you put it on the people around you. Because the amazing thing is you are rather useless once you've passed out, right? So once you are unconscious, you are of no value. The amazing thing is once oxygen is restored, you come back to life incredibly quickly. And so you are of far more value to people when you are being fed life-breathing oxygen, and then you can serve the people around you and the needs that you have. And so the idea of the oxygen mask on the airplane is one that I use frequently.
Those are great metaphors.
Yeah. And I love how both the cup metaphors worked out beautifully. But all I can think of is pouring the dregs of the coffee left with the grounds in it. Like, who wants that? Nobody wants that. You want the first pour, right?
I can't tell you how many times in session in the mornings, I'll be drinking coffee and the filter has messed up, and I'll be mid-session and get a mouthful of grounds. And it takes everything in me not to just spew it onto the patient in front of me.
Well, that is a really good metaphor. Now I think we all can leave on a good note. And thank you so much, Ellen and Marty. Those were wonderful metaphors.
Indeed. Ellen, where can folks connect with you or learn more about your work?
So you can connect with me through, email is fine. I'd be fine with that. My name is Ellen Hampshire, and my email is hampshire.ellen@gmail.com. So really simple.
All right. Marty.
Yeah. Let's see here. I'm on Facebook, Marty Height, but then also Psychology Today. I have a profile, and then our website here, Envision Counseling Services. You can connect with us here. And then my email is also pretty simple, jmheight@gmail.com, jmheight.
Right. Hampshire.ellen@gmail.com and jmheight@gmail.com. Thanks so much, guys. This was fantastic. For everybody who joins us listening in, next week we will be having a conversation about public health and epidemiology. So here we are in the middle of a pandemic. We've got all kinds of words and stories floating around about that. So come find out what's true, what's not.
That's right. And while you wait, please leave us a review, rate us wherever you get your podcasts. Become a subscriber to the afterwordpodcast.com. It does help us keep the conversations going. And as always, remember, you are welcome at our table.